Hey everybody, welcome back to another Friday Live. Today we're going to chat about budget blowouts, what to do basically if you've spent more than what you may have allocated at the start of the month. Now just while everybody is jumping on, quickly just introduce myself if we have not had a chance to hang out before. If you are stumbling across this video somehow and you're wondering, who is this chick? My name is Nikki. I am a frugal living and family finance blogger, and basically I just love sharing tips and tricks that have helped our family budget better, demolish all of our debt. We paid off $73,000 worth of consumer debt in 22 months a couple of years back, and basically just build wealth and live an awesome, abundant life. That's pretty much the crux of everything that we are all about here. And if you are catching this video as a replay later on down the track, it's probably worthwhile noting that we are in April of 2020. So we are in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic that is affecting pretty much everybody across the globe. And at the moment here in Australia, we are still in lockdown. We have quite a few restrictions going on, and life just isn't quite what you'd consider normal. We have restrictions on how often we can go out and what we can go out and do. We have businesses that are closed, and even to the point at the supermarket we have buying restrictions and limitations on how many things that we can buy. And because of all of these things that are going on, I know that there are a lot of people at the moment that I'm talking to that are all in a similar sort of boat, and we're all having these massive budget blowouts. Even people that have been budgeting quite successfully for a while now are finding that their numbers just aren't stacking up. So we are going to talk about that a little bit because of sort of what everybody is experiencing here at the moment. But if you are catching this video later on down the track, let me just say that budget blowouts happen. They just happen in life. So if you're starting out your debt-free journey, maybe you're just getting into budgeting, you're learning about budgeting, the first couple of budgets that you do are probably gonna suck. Let's just be honest. I don't think there is anybody that has gone from ending up in a bit of a financial mess, deciding they're going to turn their life around, they're going to do this budgeting thing, they're going to pay off their debt, they've jumped in, their first month, their budget has been without any problems. So if that is you, if you're coming across this video because you are struggling, just know first of all that budget blowouts are really normal, particularly early on, because one of the things that we need to learn is actually what are acceptable budgeting allocations, and often we don't know that. But if you're catching this now because it's April and we're in the middle of this whole COVID-19 thing and your budget just isn't working, well, we're going to talk about that as well. So I can see a couple of you guys have jumped on. So if you are watching this live, if you could just shout out and say hi, let me know that you guys are there. I would love to chat with you today. So say g'day. Let me know that you are there. Say hello in the comments. I do love hearing from you guys. And of course, if you've got any questions as we go along, feel free to chuck them in the comments. I will do my absolute best to answer everybody's questions. It's a big part of the reason why I do these Friday lives is so that I can have a bit of a chat with you guys. So that would be awesome. Love to hear from you. And of course, if you're catching this later on as a replay, then why don't you just pop that in, say hi. Anyways, I always do go back through and check the comments. So say g'day, let me know that you caught the replay. I would love to hear from you guys as well. All right, so big long intro, let's get into it. Let's talk budgets. And specifically, I'm going to talk to you guys about our budget because it hasn't been a good month. Hey Amanda, how are you guys doing? Hope you guys are coping with everything that's going on in this crazy world at the moment, and everything's good where you guys are. Awesome to hear from you. And yeah, if you've got any questions as we go along, just let me know. I'm more than happy to answer them for you guys. All right, so let's talk April, and just let me know in the comments if you guys have sort of experienced this as you've been going along. This is what happened to me this month, and this is pretty much why I decided to do this video, because I'd forgotten about this experience. So we're traveling along through the month. We do a monthly budget. We actually do our budget at the end of the month. So we do a monthly budget before the month begins. So we sat down the end of March and we planned out our April budget. And of course, we had no idea at that point kind of what April was really going to shape up like, other than we were in lockdown and we probably weren't going to be able to go out and do a lot of spending in our eating out and those sorts of categories. But other than that, we really didn't know, because it was really sort of the second month of lockdown. So one of the things that we did do that was different this month though was stopped using cash envelopes. So in March I still had some cash envelopes. I was still using cash envelopes for some, because remember we did that in February. And so heading into April we decided to go cashless. And I haven't been cashless for a long time, because that is my Achilles heel. Tapping and swiping usually ends up with me overspending. I'm not great at tracking my spending throughout the month as I go. I know that that's one of my weaknesses. So what I've done in the past is I've implemented a money management strategy that works for me, which is cash envelopes. And then I can allocate how much we're going to spend, put that exact amount of money into a cash envelope, and then I can see how much I've spent, how much I've got left to spend. Doesn't take a lot of brain power. But this time we're going cashless. So I was already nervous before the month started. Every single transaction was going to go onto my card, and I got about halfway through April and pretty much freaked out, because I just knew that we were overspending. Everything was different. I was going to the shops, going grocery shopping. Our usual brands weren't available. We were buying different brands. I was shopping a little bit more often, because some of those restrictions meant that we couldn't get, say, a week's worth of milk and things like that. So I had to pop back in. I was doing those top-up shops, which are also a bit dangerous for me. I got about halfway through April and I just felt like the whole thing had gone completely off the rails. I hadn't been tracking my spending. I just felt instinctively like we had been spending so much money. So let me know if you guys ever experience that. Is it something you experience within your lives? Do you just sort of get that feeling where you just feel everything's just completely out of control? Your spending is just blown out. You know that you're spending more than what you should do, but you don't actually have the figures. And so that was certainly me, and that was me 5 years ago. I always felt like that with our budgeting, and it's one of the things that I didn't like about our family finances and our money, was that it just felt completely out of control. It just felt like we were just bleeding. We were leaking out. We were just leaking money everywhere. And it was one of the biggest pitfalls with our budgeting, because we'd set a budget and then we'd do what we needed to do throughout the week, throughout the month, and then we'd come back and we'd then reevaluate, and we'd always find that it had blown out and it didn't work. And I was really terrified that that's what was happening this month. So I actually sat down and I did a spending audit, and this is what I would really encourage you guys to do if you're finding yourself in that situation. Let's not make assumptions. Let's actually sit down and see where our money is going. That's our first step. So if you feel like your budget is blowing out, don't wait until you get to the end of the month. Sit down and do it now. The earlier that you can actually do it, the better, because if we can find out that there are blowouts, then we can sort of course correct throughout the month. Don't wait until the end of the month to see how bad it's been. Do a spending audit now, and let's just see where our money's been going and what we've been doing. So that is my tip number one. If you are just finding that your spending's completely out of control, let's see what's going on, and let's see if it's as bad as actually as what it feels like. If you find out that you are spending more, that you are either you've overspent or you are going to overspend, then we need to sit down and have a look at why. What's going on? What's changed? Why is it that the amount that we have allocated at the start of the month or the start of the week, whenever you've done your budget, is inadequate for what's happening in your life at the moment? Because basically that's what's going on. When we sit down and we do a budget at the start of the month, we are estimating what we're going to need. We are trying to put some boundaries in place so that we have some control over our finances, and we're making sure that our needs are met, our obligations are met, and then any goals that we are working towards are met. That's the idea of the budget. But the reality is that there's a big gap between what happens between the lines of a spreadsheet and what actually really happens out there in the real world. So the first thing to sit down is, let's sit down and have a look, see if it's gone off the rails, and then let's analyze why that might be happening. So in our case at the moment, there's a couple of things that are going on that are pushing some of our regular categories out. And I did mention a couple of those earlier, and you guys have probably experienced some of these yourselves. If you've experienced other things that are pushing your budget out, let me know in the comments what kind of factors you guys have actually been able to see and note that are affecting your budget at the moment. So the big ones for us are, first of all, routine. My routine's been thrown for a loop. I'm not shopping once a week and picking up everything that I need, and I'm not paying with cash. I'm not finding my usual brands. So again, this is routine. So I'm used to buying the same things week in, week out, and I kind of know how much that's going to cost us. And when I can't find those brands, when they're not available, and I'm substituting other brands, it's throwing my grocery budget for a loop. I bought toilet paper the other day, and I bought 8 rolls of toilet paper for $9, and that just doesn't happen in my world. I normally buy the big pack from Aldi, which has got 12 or 18 packs in it for like $8.50. So yeah, all of those sorts of things are just throwing the whole system out of whack. It feels different. Our brains are sort of picking up on these things that aren't quite gelling with what's normal, but it is also actually inflating our budgets as well. So we can identify those sorts of things at the moment. Perhaps if we're just talking in general terms, forget coronavirus, some of the things that can happen is that perhaps when we've sat down and done our budget, we have underestimated how much we need to spend in some of these categories. That's one of the reasons why doing a spending audit is really helpful, to give us an idea of what our average spend is. And it's one of the reasons why I don't love percentage-based budgets, because I don't think they take into consideration a lot of those personal situations that can affect how much we spend. Everything from, if we're talking about grocery budgets, and we'll just stick with that for our example, if we just give a flat percentage or a flat spend, it doesn't take into consideration things like where you live regionally, how many people are in your household, whether or not you have any dietary requirements. Like, all of those sorts of things affect us and how much we need to spend in our personal lives. The better thing to do is to go back through and say, look at the last 3 months to 6 months of your spending and just analyze and see what on average you have been spending. That is a much better place to start. And a lot of people, when they start budgeting, they miss that. They want to jump straight into creating a budget and making it work, and they don't take the time to look back at their old habits, their situation, and their even just individual needs to see what would be a reasonable amount for them to expect to spend in these categories. The second thing is change. Like, we're not great at change. So it's one thing to find out that you've been spending way too much on groceries. like us, when we first did our first spending audit of our groceries, I was mortified at how much we were spending on groceries, and it was more than what we needed to. But again, I couldn't go from spending, say, the average was $1,100 a month, and it could blow out if we included groceries, or if we decided to do some sort of fancy diet, which happened quite a bit, we could easily push that out. We often spent more on groceries than what we did on our rent. Now, we couldn't jump straight into spending, say, $500 or $600 a month on groceries, because we didn't know how to make that work. We didn't know how to cook like that. We didn't know how to shop like that. We didn't know how to make it work. It took time to learn those new skills and transition over. And a lot of time I see people, and it is happening a little bit now, because with all of the stuff that's happening with people being stood down, or not having the hours that they would have had, they're trying to jump into these frugal living and lifestyle tips, and you'll have somebody who says, oh, I can feed my family of blah, blah, blah for this amount, and they try and replicate that. But what we're missing is that there's a lot of other factors that factor into whether or not that's achievable, not only just the logistics of it, but taking into account all of those other personal factors that affect all of that. And a lot of the times our budgets don't work because we have this expectation of somebody else has done it, so therefore I should be able to make that work, or such and such expert says that I should spend this percentage on this amount. And we haven't stopped to consider whether or not that's actually applicable in our lives. My advice to you guys, and what worked for us, was to work out where you are. Do a spending audit, work out what is actually happening, what has been happening in your life, and start from there. So if you haven't started there, then that's where I would start. We may need to up our grocery budget a little bit before we can learn these new ways to bring that grocery budget down. And it is really a system of reining it in a small amount at a time, learning to get comfortable, and then learning some new tricks and tips, and then reining in it a little bit more until we get down to a point where you guys feel comfortable that that works for your specific set of circumstances. But what's happening at the moment, and so what we've experienced, is that we've been pretty comfortable with our budget, our grocery budget being where it was, and we'll allocate anywhere between $600 and $700 a month for our family of 5, and we make that work. We've been making that work for donkeys, but now all of a sudden it's not. So why is it not working? And that's where we need to look at those outside factors that are affecting our budget. So once we've identified what's going on, is it something that we can control, or is it something that we need to accommodate for? You're going to fall into one of those types of, it's going to be one of those two categories. So in our case, at the moment, for the majority of people, it's something that's outside of our control, and it's something that we need to learn to accommodate for. So how can we accommodate it? And that's where we're going to go and have a look at those other areas of our budgets, and we may have to pinch from some of those categories that we can cut back on, that are sort of elective. Well, they are elective. Perhaps it's things like eating out that you can't do really very much at the moment anyways. Maybe we're not spending as much on fuel because we're all staying home. And we can use some of that excess funds in those categories to sort of pump up the ones that we are struggling with, that we are blowing out on. That's usually sort of your first step. And if we can do this spending audit before the end of the month, before we've hit that point where there's too much month and not enough money, that's a really easy way just to sort of balance the scales. And that was something that we actually did quite a few times, particularly early on when we were learning how to make our budget work, was when we sort of did that halfway or 3/4 of the way through the budget, and it looked like it was spiraling out of control. We did the audit, we saw where we were going off course, and we used some excess funds or leftover funds from some of those other categories, and we course corrected that way. And I know that when you're doing things like cash envelopes, you know, there's this whole big rule about you've got this amount of money to spend in these categories. you can't pinch from other categories and all those sorts of rules. But I honestly think particularly when you're first starting out, or when you have a situation like this that is unusual, I think the most important thing is to keep your budget overall on track. And if you need to adjust some of your budget allocations and redirect some of those funds as a once-off, then I think that's fine. And I'd really be encouraging you guys to do that at the moment. If that's what you're finding is happening with your budget, you've got some categories that are going off kilter, let's look at where we can pick up the slack in other areas of the budget. And it may mean making some cuts, cutting back on some things that you don't really want to do, but maybe we need to do it as a once-off to keep our budget on track and stop us from doing things like reaching for credit cards and things like that to handle the slack of our grocery budget being more than ordinarily what we're used to. Now that's great as a once-off, but we don't want to be doing it all the time. And if you are early on in your budgeting and you're finding you're doing it all the time, then that's when we need to sit down and go, okay, we need to have a good hard look at these categories and decide whether or not we're actually allocating enough to them in the first place. Because remember what I was saying earlier, that is one of the biggest mistakes that the majority of people make early on when they jump into budgeting, is that they're just not allocating enough. And that's why our budgets aren't working. So I did say we're going to talk about our budget today, and I'm a little bit nervous about actually talking about our numbers, because it's not as bad as actually what I thought it was going to be. I feel like I've sort of made a big deal out of it, and I really did feel really, really uncomfortable. But I can look back and have a look at that analysis now and actually see that it's because my routines and my normal habits have been disrupted, that basically I'm getting that feeling that something's not right. I'm spending too much money. And in some categories I have overspent, but I've underspent in other categories, which I was really, really surprised about. So basically what I've found, I know this is going to be hard. This is definitely easier if I could put little things up on the screen so you guys could see this, but bear with me. Basically, this is what we've got. At the start of April, we allocated our three main categories that we were going to spend constantly out of. Everything else gets divvied up, it gets done on the first of the month, and then it's taken care of. So I go through and I do all of our payments for the whole month at the beginning of the month. All of our savings that we've decided, it all gets moved across immediately. I don't sit on that money, I don't hold on to it, because I find that if I hold on to any of our savings or our debt repayments, because something might come up and I might need that money for something always comes up and I always need that money for something. That was mistake number one. And so as soon as it was allocated and I knew that the budget balanced, that money went where it needed to go. And we still do that today. So all of our savings, our investing, all of that sort of stuff, it happens at the beginning of the month. It's all done. And then we're left with a few variable categories that we spend out of throughout the month. And this month, because we decided we weren't going to be going out very much, we didn't allocate any money for our budget meeting date night, coffees and eating out, alcohol, our kids' fun money dates, our family fun, any of that sort of stuff. We didn't allocate. They normally go into cash envelopes. We didn't do any of that sort of stuff. So we were left with groceries, our miscellaneous spending. I should also say, we also keep a buffer of $100 in our account as well. And we set aside some funds for renovating our caravan. So we had $700 for groceries, $100 for our miscellaneous, plus remember we've got that $100 buffer that we always keep in our account just in case. That's our cushion. And $300 for the caravan. So all in all, I had $1,100 to spend across all of those categories. And I knew some of them blew out. We spent about $300 getting stuff for our autumn veggie patch, seedlings and fertilizer and mulch and stuff like that. And again, spent more because if any of you guys have tried to get any of that sort of stuff, everybody has turned full prepper and you can't buy anything. You can't go to Bunnings and buy seedlings or cheap fertilizer or any of that sort of stuff. The shelves are bare. It's nutsy cuckoo. So we ended up spending $300 on stuff just to put in the veggie patch. We also have spent $370 on our miscellaneous spending, which, if you remember, I had $100 allocated for that and $300 for the caravan. So some of that stuff was stuff that we needed. We bought a new mattress for the caravan. Aldi had them for $200, which is awesome, so we grabbed that. But there was some other bits and pieces that just seemed to add up really quickly. Ink for the printer for the kids' homeschooling. Shan bought some digital music, bits and pieces like that. The good thing though is, and much to my surprise, as much as I've been to the supermarket I've done more trips to the supermarket than ordinarily what we do. We have only spent $350, which was really, really surprising because I honestly thought we had spent more. Now, we're in a unique situation in that we have a really good stockpile. I have heaps of things on hand. I have a well-stocked freezer full of stickers. And I really like to pick up stickers. And what we've done this month is we've actually been using our stockpile of all of those things. And I've tried really, really, really hard to resist the urge to buy stickers, even though I have found some. And we've just topped up on the bits and pieces that we've actually needed, things like milk and bread and those sorts of weekly essentials that you always need. So we've actually done well. So when I've actually tallied it, now we haven't seen the month out yet, we haven't finished, but so far we're actually sitting under our budget. We are sitting at $1,020 and we had $1,100 to spend across all of those categories. Now my categories are being completely out of whack. I've spent more in some of those categories than what I allocated, but all in all, I haven't actually blown the budget yet, which is a good thing. So sometimes doing that spending audit actually brings a lot of peace because we realize that perhaps it's not as bad as what it is, particularly when we look at a couple of categories, which is what I've done. I'm justifying my overspending on the vegetable patch because it's food and we're going to eat it later. Whatever works for you guys. The bottom, I suppose, the bottom line is that once we come to the end of this month, as long as we haven't gone backwards, we haven't dipped into our savings, we don't have a credit card anymore, so we don't have that luxury because, again, I knew that was one of my Achilles heels. If I had it, I would use it. So we decided to get rid of it. So as long as we stay on track, we have pinched from a couple of those other categories to balance things out. But in the end, we are going to get through April pretty much on track. Now, what does that mean moving forward and what do we do? I need to have a really serious hard look at what's going to happen in May. And I certainly would not cut my grocery budget any lower than what it is. I'm actually thinking we may increase it a little bit because although we've got through April, I know that we're going to have to go back and we're going to have to stock up, which means there's probably going to be a few big shops in there. I am hoping that soon this whole situation is going to settle down. We're going to get back to a bit of normalcy at the supermarket where I can rely on being able to buy my usual no-name brand products and picking up specials. I do rely on that a lot to keep our grocery budget down, and I'm hoping that will return to normal soon, but if not, I need to be prepared for that, and I think it would be wise to perhaps bump that category up a little bit for next month just to be prepared. So that would be my advice to you guys, is to have a look at those categories, see where the problems are. Is it because of tongue-tied? Is it because of circumstances outside of your control in which you need to accommodate for those? Or is it something that you're doing? Is it part of your behavior? Is it not being accountable? Are we just using this situation as an excuse to go a bit bananas at the supermarket and spend whatever we want to do. I'm not saying you guys are doing that, but these are the sorts of questions that we sort of need to ask ourselves, particularly if you're catching this later on down the track, when things are a bit more normal. Is it circumstances outside of our control, or is it something that we have control over and we can start reining in our spending? So just bear with me a sec. I've gone completely off script here, guys. I don't think I've covered anything that I wrote down on my little sticky notes. I have 3 of them. So if you guys have got any questions so far about budget blowouts, or you have perhaps like a specific situation that you want to chat about while I'm checking my notes and seeing what I've missed, if you guys want to chuck any questions or anything like that you guys have got in the comments, then go ahead and do that now. Or if there's anything else that's going on that you just want to chat about, I don't really mind. I'm here for a chat, so just whatever you feel like, go ahead, ask away. I'm an open book. Oh yeah, that was a good point. I should probably come back to that. All right, I'm going to save that one. We've pretty much covered that. What I will say, just while you guys are quickly just jotting in any questions or anything that you guys have got, or just want to say hello, that would be awesome too. Say hello. I do get this asked a lot, which is what programs and stuff do I use? And if you guys are new to following me, you may not have seen this before. I like a handwritten budget. So this is my actual budget for April. I like to handwrite things. That's just me. There is a few videos over on YouTube where you can actually see me going through our budget, and I'll explain all the different parts that we track and why we track them and all of that sort of stuff. So it has 2 pages, and that is basically the rundown of our budget. And one of the things that I have done is I've automated as much of that budget as I can so that it all happens at the start of the month. We do a month ahead budget, and we've actually put ourselves into a position where we stockpile all of our income from one month to be divvied up on the first of the next month. And I don't expect you guys to be in that situation, or even necessarily to do that. It's totally up to you. That's just what works for us. I don't like being super hands-on with our budget all the time. That kind of drives me a little bit crazy. But what I like to do is I do like to have control over it. I do like to have a few simple systems in place that keep our budget on track. And we use a lot of cash envelopes and sinking funds. So this pretty much automates itself. There's a little bit of room each month for us to get specific, do some month specific budgeting. But for the most part, I just have money every single month automatically go across into our sinking funds for things like our car maintenance, clothing, medical, all of those sorts of things, gifts and special occasions. That all happens automatically, and then I spend out of those accounts. Then we have cash envelopes for the things that are variable expenses that we will often need to access multiple times a month. So things like groceries, eating out, personal spending money. Ordinarily, that's all cash. And this system works really good for me because I can look at either one of our sinking funds, or I can look at our cash envelopes and I can see exactly how much money I have left to spend. It's really easy. It's an easy way for me to track it. And because it's all automated, I really don't have to do too much with it every month. I just check in at the end of the month, decide what we want to do for the next month, how much money we've actually got to spend, because it's just stockpiled in our holding tank account for the whole month, and then it just goes all off. So because of that, I don't do a lot of traditional spending analysis. It's not my strong suit. I wasn't great at budgets and money management systems that required me to remember to write stuff down after I'd spend it. And I'd find that I'd get like 2 weeks and then I'd be like, oh, that's right. I went to Kmart and I bought $20 worth of stuff, but I don't know what that was for. I don't know what category that should have come. It just didn't work. So I stopped doing it and went with this other system. But one of the things that I do still do is once a quarter, when we do the $1,000 challenge, which we didn't actually run this time around because of everything that's happening. But I encourage you guys all to do a spending audit to set up your first budget. But probably what I don't explain is that I do a spending audit to see where we've been going with our spending. And I go back through all of those, particularly those sinking fund accounts, which I've spent out of. And I put all of that money, put all of those purchases into an app. The app that I use is called Budget Book Pro. It's one of the very few apps that I've actually paid for. It was like $5. But I really like it because it actually analyzes our spending. And that's how I track whether or not our sinking funds have enough to allocate, being allocated enough funds to cover our expenses. So if we look at our car maintenance sinking fund, for example, every month I put $350 into there, and that covers everything from registration, insurance, servicing, tires, all of that sort of stuff. So using an app like this, I can go back through, put all of those yearly type purchases into that, and that'll do a 12-month analysis and let me know on average kind of how much I'm spending in each of those categories. And the reason why I mention that is because that's how I use it. But if you wanted to use it to track your monthly spending, it's a really good, easy little app. There's actually a whole heap of them out there. And I know most people use their apps to actually check in and touch base month to month. So you'll allocate your budget at the start of the month or at the start of the week or whatever. And then you'll use a program to track your spending to make sure that you're on track. I don't typically do that because, again, like I said earlier, I've got these sinking funds and cash envelopes that I spend out of, and that's what keeps me on track. Ordinarily, once they're empty, there's no more spending. But that's not working for me at the moment because we've gone cashless in a few categories. It is keeping the rest of my budget on track, which is probably why it hasn't blown out as bad as what I feel like it has, although I'm tapping and swiping a lot more than what I ordinarily would, because it is all divvied out into these specific categories. And we haven't bought any clothes because we don't need to. We haven't touched the family fun because we can't go out. All of those, car maintenance. Oh, I did pay the registration on our camper trailer at the start of the month, but that just comes straight out of that account. So I don't necessarily see that sort of stuff happening. So I don't have a lot going on week to week in my actual budget, if that makes sense, because of the way that I've set it up. Because I sat down, and this has been trial and error over many, many years, working out what I'm good at and what I'm not. And I'd really, really encourage you guys, every time you sit down and do this sort of, whether you're doing a spending analysis or whether you're just sitting down and you're looking at your budget and you're asking yourself, why does it not feel like it's working? First of all, I want you guys to know that most budgets, to get to a point where they work seemingly on autopilot, is because there's been a lot of trial and error and learning in the lead up to that point. I don't think anybody, certainly not for us and not for anybody that I've worked with, has jumped into the perfect budget that just works. Even we're still tinkering. You know, every year we make slight changes, we try something different, we see if we can streamline something and work towards something that works just a little bit easier for us. But what we have learned to do, and what I encourage you guys to do, is start to understand what your strengths are, what you're good at, what your Achilles heels are, where you're getting tripped up. And that's where these sort of sitting down and having a look at these analysis can let us know, give us some insights as to these things that are tripping up. And then let's just find some solutions that work for you. I don't actually believe that there is a one-size-fits-all budget that works for everybody. I know there are a lot of people that claim that they have it, and there's nothing more frustrating than seeing a really great budgeting formula let's not pick on anybody in particular, but, you know, say you've set up your budget so that you've got 60% to live off and 20% to pay off your debts and 10% splurge and 10% small, and it just doesn't work for you. You just can't make those numbers work. And you see people that are making it work, and it kind of feels like there's something wrong, like you're failing because you can't make this work. The reality is that there isn't any one system that works great for everybody. I explained to you guys what I do, just because it's different and you don't really see a lot of people doing it. It might give you guys some ideas for some things to change, to try, sorry. But the reality is we all just need to sit down and work out what plays to our strengths and what helps us overcome our weaknesses when it comes to managing our money. This is what I found that works for me and the systems that I need in place so that we can work towards our goals. Because ultimately, the whole reason why we budget, the whole reason why my family does this every single month is so that we can achieve our financial goals. We've got something that we're trying to work towards, and we need to put systems in place that are going to make it easier for us to get there. So if you are finding that the thing that you're doing in your budget really isn't working, let's sit down, let's have a look, let's do a spending analysis. We can do a short-term spending analysis and do like a little micro analysis. Let's have a look at the last month and work out why that's going off the track. Maybe we need to sit down and have a look a bit further, maybe 3 months to 6 months, and see if our budgeting allocations is actually reasonable for us and our basically, what am I trying to say? I've just gone completely blank. All of those factors that need to factor into our budget, where we live, all of that sort of stuff. Are we accounting for that sort of stuff, or are we trying to mold to an unrealistic expectation? Let's have a look and sit down on what we're doing. If we're budgeting, are we doing things that encourage us to stick to our budget and make it easy for us to live within those boundaries? Or are we making it really hard for ourselves? Like I said, I'm not great at tracking purchases after the fact. So if all of my spending goes on one card, then I can't track it. I'm just not good at it. So it just doesn't work for me. So we need to be honest about some of those sorts of things. If we're having blowouts because of those reasons, let's look into some other systems and strategies. I call them money management tools that might work for us a bit better. And it's okay to mix and match. We do a mix of some of our budget is automated, some of our money comes out of sinking funds, some of it goes into cash envelopes, because that's the magic mix that works for us. And it is absolutely 100% perfectly fine for you guys to find your perfect mix. So maybe that's the reason why you're having a budget blowout. Maybe it's because we're not using the right money management tools to make sure that you are sticking with whatever it is that you've set out, those boundaries that you've allocated at the beginning of the month. Maybe there are other factors, which I know a lot of you guys are facing at the moment, which are completely out of your control. And if that's the case, then we need to ask the question, well, we've gone through and we've asked all those other questions. We've done everything that we possibly can do in our power to make sure that we're just maximizing our efforts. Then it's time to say, okay, what are the factors that are completely out of our control that we need to now compensate for? And how can we compensate? Where is going to be the best place to pull from so that we can still keep working towards our goals, keep our budget on track so that we can hit our financial goals? So in today's climate, right now, with all this COVID-19 stuff going on, then maybe we are bumping up our grocery budget, and we're pulling from places like our eating out and our entertainment and all that sort of stuff. And that's perfectly okay. It's okay to change your budget month to month. So what you do, what you did this month, maybe it wasn't great. Maybe May looks completely different with those allocations, and that's okay. Because the thing is that whatever you do in May, you don't have to live with that for the rest of your life. You can change that in June. Now, sure, it's great to get to a point where part of our budget is kind of like already pre-written, because, and they're decisions that we don't have to make. If we just, those things, we've decided that we're going to invest 10%, we've got X amount for rent, we're going to cap our whatever at this much. It's great to have those sorts of things a bit set and forget, but we need to have room to be able to just change some of those figures a little bit if we need to, particularly in response to what's going on. Now, the other thing that I will say, and I can't stress this enough, if you guys haven't done the $1,000 challenge and stuff like that with me, I will just do a brief explanation of some of these terms that I'm about to use. But if you guys do not have a buffer yet, that needs to go into your next budget. Honestly, the buffer has absolutely saved our bacon, our budget, more times than I would like to admit. The buffer is amazing. The buffer is basically a set amount. Now, we started with about $200. We're now sitting at $100. We did drop it down to $50. Didn't work so great, so we bumped it back up to $100. And that is an amount that is unallocated in our budget. It's allocated as the buffer, but it's unallocated. So if you are doing an every dollar budget, a zero budget where every dollar is allocated, you want to allocate some money in your budget to the buffer. And the idea of the buffer is that you don't spend it. It is there to absorb some of that fluctuation. Perhaps it's a direct debit that you've forgotten to allocate for. We want to get to the point where we've got all of that sort of stuff happening in our budget. Perhaps it's because you need to increase, say, your grocery allowance or your fuel allowance has been one of those variable spending categories that are necessities. Perhaps they've been a little bit higher than what you've expected. Maybe your elect bills come in and it's a little bit higher than what you had anticipated. The buffer is there to absorb a little bit of that slack, and it will absolutely save you. The thing about the buffer is if you cannot spend it, then that's the best, and we just keep it there and it just rolls over. If you do spend a little bit of it, the idea is that in the next budget, whether it's weekly, fortnightly, monthly, however you budget, so for us it's monthly, we top it back up to, so for us it's $100. You guys need to work out the right amount for you. I recommend, if you don't have a buffer and if you are budgeting, say, fortnightly or monthly, you want to go towards the upper end. I'd be looking at, say, around $100 or maybe even $200. If you budget weekly, you can probably drop your buffer a little bit lower, maybe somewhere between $50 and $100. But the idea is that always just sits in your account and it's there to pick up some of the slack. The other thing that I will say with your budgeting, you may have heard me mention earlier, we have a miscellaneous line. So we allocate a certain amount each month for just random spending. Now, we have budgeting categories for pretty much everything that we spend on regularly, including our splash cash, our personal spending money, which Shannon and I both get a set amount of splash cash, which is just ours to just go and blow on whatever we want. Doesn't matter. We have fun money, family fun money. We have travel. We have all of that sort of stuff. But then we also have this miscellaneous amount as well. And it is for things that sort of crop up. They're not little mini emergencies. Your buffer is more like little mini emergencies. You don't want to tap into your emergency fund, but you don't want your budget to go over the or off the rails either. That's what your buffer's there for. Like, it's a little mini emergency fund. Your miscellaneous is to be spent on things that you just didn't allocate in your budget. So whether it be for lots of little things, so things that came out of our budget, our miscellaneous budget this month was ink for the printer. It's not something that I budget for all the time. It doesn't really go into any other category. So it's for those sorts of things too. So definitely 100%, if your budget does not have a buffer, it needs one. And the other thing is, think about whether or not it just needs a miscellaneous line. Do you add that as well? Because then you've got a bit of leeway in your spending. It doesn't have to all be allocated. But if some of those categories sort of spill over a little bit, you have a buffer. You have a bit of leeway in your budget as well, which is going to absorb some of that and not send the whole thing off kilter. A budget that is micromanaged, a budget that is so tight that, you know, if something is a little bit more expensive, or if something comes up that you didn't budget for and the whole thing falls apart at the seams, that's not a budget that you're going to be able to live with long term. You need a system, money management system, which is what your budget is, a spending plan that allows you to actually have a life, to live a little bit, to breathe a little bit. If your budget is so tight that you can't breathe, it's not sustainable long term. So that's probably that last thing that we need to look at if we're talking about our budgets going off the rail. The first thing that I would do, other than in this COVID situation, although if you don't have a budget, you need to put one in there. If it just seems to be going off the rails and you're not too sure why, I'd definitely be putting those two things in there, at least to pick up some of the slack so that we can get our budgets at least evening out each month. They may not be perfect. Our spending categories, we may need to be sort of moving things around more than what we would like. But until we get to a point where we've got those allocations adequate, then having a buffer and having a miscellaneous line in our budget is definitely going to help take some of the slack. So they are pretty much my top tips. I don't know how many that was, so that's why it's not in the title. And all of that, you know, that just all comes from experience. I'm not great at budgeting. It's not something that I've been naturally good at. I've really had to learn how to do it, and I've had to work hard at finding ways that work. One of the things that I did early on was I jumped in and out of systems looking for the right system to fit me, and it just didn't exist. Once I stopped doing that, and I just took a step back and I really started to look at, okay, what's actually going on in our lives? What's going on with our money? And then I started to look at myself and Shannon, my husband, who's the other big player in our budget. Okay, what are we doing? What's our behaviors? What's our habits? Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? And then starting to find things that work. And it's a bit like a big jigsaw puzzle where you're taking bits and pieces from different people. You're trying it on for size, and you're seeing what works and what doesn't work, and trying different combinations of things until you get to a point where you have a budget that you feel gives you control, gives you accountability, but also helps you work towards your goals. And that's the most important thing. If we've got a budget that's just so tight that we can't enjoy our lives in any way, and I, even while we were paying off all of our debt, we still found ways to have a little bit of fun, because if you can't live with it, you're not going to sustain it. So that's the biggest thing is, are we having a budget blowout just because our budget is just so unrealistic, or it's just so unsuited to not only our lives and the things that are going on in our lives, but to our personalities as well? Is that why we're having our budget blowouts? I don't suspect that that's what's going on for most of you guys at the moment, and certainly with my clients that I work on one-on-one with, who I know are in the same sort of situation as we are. We've got to a point where we've had this budget that's been working, and it's, you know, it's got a couple of bumps in the road, but on the whole, like, it's working pretty well. The current situation in the world at the moment is throwing everybody for a loop. So don't feel bad if that is you. What we just need to do is just regroup. Let's have a look. Just to recap, for you guys, if that's where you're finding yourself right now, we haven't hit the end of April. So let's do a little bit of a spending analysis. Let's see what April has actually happened, what's happened in April. Maybe some of our categories are a little bit out of whack, but on the whole, are we on track? Are we completely over budget? Have we had to pull from savings or put some of our expenses on a credit card? How can we rectify that? And how can we come out the end of April, so we hit May 1st, and we're on an even playing field. That's the goal. Is it might not be perfect. Maybe we haven't paid as much off debt as what we would have liked. Maybe we haven't saved as much. But if we come out on an even playing field as opposed to going backwards, that's always the best option. Maybe we need to say to ourselves, all right, you know, we had some money set aside, allocated for some fun personal stuff. Maybe I'm going to take what's left of my splash cash and I'm going to use that in the grocery budget or whatever. Whatever it is that you need to do to sort of even the playing field so that you can come out square at the end and on track. That is the goal from this point onwards. So for us, we got $80. We got $80 left. Woo! Until you know, May 1st. But that's okay. We can make it on $80. We don't really need any more. We don't need a big grocery shop. We'll probably go back and get some fresh fruit and veggies, milk and all that sort of stuff. But we should be able to make that on $80 and we'll be square. And that's the goal. That's the goal, guys. And then we're going to sit down when we do May's budget. Today is actually our budget meeting date night day because we don't go out. So we will actually be sitting down and we'll be making some decisions about May. We're going to look at our first cashless month. We're going to decide what worked, what didn't work. For me, I felt like there was a lot of things that didn't work. So there's some of the things that we'll be talking about today with our budget meeting and looking at May and what we're going to do with May and how we're going to make May work. Not only the allocations that we want to put in our budget, but also our systems, our money management systems. What are some things that we can try, or how can we handle our current need to not use cash? How can we do that a bit better for the current situation that we're in? And then, like I said, you know, we'll live with that for May. And then if we get it to work, then that's great. If not, and we need to readjust for June, I mean, let's hope we get to the point where we can go back to some normalcy, but we'll reevaluate, and that's perfectly fine. Like, we've been budgeting for 5 years or something now, and we're still constantly making these little alterations and making little changes. And I just want you guys to know that that's perfectly fine and it's perfectly normal. I think there's an expectation that we get to a point where our budgets is just on autopilot, where we don't have to think about it, we don't have to touch it. And I'm always reminded when I think of this, I would say our budget's pretty much on autopilot now. But the thing about, if we think about a plane, and we think about autopilot on a plane, it's not that we just type in the coordinates and the plane just flies straight there and the pilots don't have to think or do anything. Even with the destination pre-plugged, the computer is still assessing everything and making all these little tiny course corrections. So our autopilot isn't a straight line. It's all these little course corrections as it gets to its destination and gets closer. And that's what we're doing with our budgets. We get to a point where it's pretty much set and forget. But we're still doing all these little course corrections, all these little tweaks, making it better, seeing what's working, what's not working, making a little adjustments. If we hit a storm, get a little bit of turbulence, maybe we're going to go a little bit higher, maybe we're going to go a little bit lower. That's what we're doing. It's not set and forget. It is tinkering all the way along as we go. The big parts of it, though, are pretty much handled now, which makes it pretty much set and forget, which makes it a lot easier. And like I said, we worked really hard to get to a point where I only do the budget once a month because we've got ourselves to a point where we've stockpiled. We can stockpile all of our income from one month and allocate all of that on the first of the next month, and then that's what we live off. But that took time. That took a long time before we got ourselves to a point where we could do all of those sorts of things. But that was the aim of the game with budgeting. All right. Whew. A lot of talking. Thanks so much, guys, for hanging out today. I hope you guys got a few useful tips. If you guys have got any questions, if there's anything that you guys want to bounce off, and you just, more one-on-one sort of setting, feel free just to reach out to me. You guys can always catch me in the DMs, or you guys can send me an email. If you're on my email list, you can just hit reply to any of the emails that I send to you guys. Or you can catch me at nikki@nikkibill.co. And let's sort this out. I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have got. If you're struggling with anything, let me know. Reach out. I really am just a message away. And I loved catching up with you guys today. I hope you guys are all doing well and everything is going relatively smoothly in your lives, considering the current set of circumstances that we all find ourselves in. I hope you guys are doing as well as you can be and still plugging along and still working towards your goals, or putting yourself in a position where you may be putting those things on hold, but you are managing to get through the next couple of months, and putting yourselves into a position when this all blows over, and it will, when we get back to a point that we can call normal. You guys are ready to kick it back up a notch. That's the best situation I think that we can all put ourselves in. So I hope you guys are there. And again, if there's anything going on that I can help you guys with, you guys need some ideas for some frugal living tips or some meal planning ideas or whatever, doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be on the topic of budgeting, whatever. Just reach out, leave me a comment, or like I said, send me a DM or an email. I do love hearing from you guys, and I do love helping you guys find some things that work for you guys so you guys can budget better, demolish your debts, skyrocket your savings, and have heaps of frugal fun along the way. All right, guys, that is it from me today. I will catch you next week for another frugal Facebook Live fiesta. All right, bye, guys.